You are listening to a BeachGlass Media podcast.
Great news! The results are in after the vice presidential debate between Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Walz as they hashed it all out on the debate stage this past Tuesday. And boy, what a spectacle it was as there was punching and kicking, jabbing and sparring all throughout the night. I'm sorry, I'm getting the debate confused with all the things Sean P. Diddy Combs has been accused of doing to several women following his arrest. Yes, if you haven't heard, Sean P. Diddy Combs, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. Just Diddy, a.k.a. Sean John Combs, a.k.a. Puffy, yes, that guy, has been arrested by the feds on criminal charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. Yes, folks, turns out all that rap music about violence and mistreating women as sex objects kind of does a negative number on you in the long run. But yikes, sex trafficking? I guess Diddy didn't want to see Jeffrey Epstein's hard work go to waste, huh? But don't worry, Diddy says his lawyers have a good case against his racketeering charges by saying, quote, "Our client, Puffy Daddy Diddy, did in fact cut out that racket when Diddy's neighbors called and complained about Diddy Daddy rap being bumped way too loud at odd hours of the night. They told Diddy Combs to cut out that racket, and Puffy Diddy did do that. That. So there you go. No racketeering since Diddy cut out that racket." End quote. But back to the debate. What an amazing debate it was as CBS News intelligently used two women to moderate the debate, knowing full well that Mr. Conservative J.D. Vance would never hit a woman. But, to everyone's surprise, J.D. Vance did hit a woman last night. Who was the woman he hit? Well, none other than Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, of course. He's not a traditional woman, but hey, it's the Democrats that can't seem to be able to provide a definition for the word woman because they claim to not have a biology degree. But on a side note, Tim Walz does believe in passing out tampons to middle school boys for some strange reason. Well, with that said, the public is now left to wonder, where is he hiding the tampons? I think it's time we mandate biology class for politicians. Who's with me? At any rate, Tim Walz looked to be completely off guard during the debate, as he never once thought that he would make it that far as to debate for Vice President of the United States. His biggest dream, of course, was to be Vice President of China, as uncovered in his Hello Kitty diary. But according to Tim Walz, quote, "I guess I will have to settle with trying to become the Vice President of the second greatest country in the world." End quote. The women moderators pressed hard on J.D. Vance since, unlike Tampon Tim, J.D. Vance was cool, calm, collected, and spoke eloquently, to which the women despised his suave and competent responses. The women moderators simply hate J.D.'s toxic masculinity and desperately wish that Kamala Harris' husband, Doug Emhoff, could be the new face of true masculinity as the first gentleman of the United States. Yes, true masculinity. You know, the kind of man that cheats on his first wife with the nanny, then impregnates the nanny, but then irons it all out by paying for the nanny's abortion. Also, the latest allegation of Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, allegedly physically slapped a girlfriend he once had into next week. Yes, those are the kind of men we need in our society. The kind that will cheat on you, knock up the nanny, pay for the abortion, and have ex-girlfriends come out to testify how you used to slap them. One can only dream of a man like that. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the world witnessed a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Can you believe it? Not one, but two assassination attempts on not only a former president, but the current Republican nominee for president. How could this have happened, cries the media, after months and months of them repeating the same mantra over and over again? Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And the media was stunned that someone planned to take him out a second time. But wait a sec. The shooter is innocent. I mean, yeah, he had an AK-47 style rifle on him, but he didn't shoot. I mean, doesn't everyone just carry around a gun around the golf course and hide in the bushes for hours? Sure, the attempted assassin had anti-Trump views and had hopes to fight in the Ukraine war and has a history of writing bad checks and a history of possessing weapons of mass destruction and hit and runs on his file, resisting arrest and violating concealed weapons laws. And, well, worst of all, he was a fan of Puff Daddy. I mean, if you put all that aside, the would-be assassin is just a plain and simple nice guy. But now, after the Diddy debacle, after the second assassination attempt, and of course after this VP debate, the media, with egg on their face, will now finally know who to attack viciously. Yes, now the media knows who to go after with a metaphorical AK-47, and that will be the horrendous, detestable pro-lifer J.D. Vance. Ugh. The nerve of the guy for wanting to see babies live. My name is Andrew Reyes, and this is Faith in Politics with me, Andrew Reyes. Part 1. The Church. Holy smokes, I went long on that intro. Anyway, welcome back to the podcast. I know, it's been a while since the last episode, and there has been so much in the news lately that I had no idea how I was going to be able to squeeze it all in that opening satire, but I think I managed to do so. I went a little long, sorry, once again. I'm going to try to keep it short next time, and I'll try to speed up the part 1 and the part 2s of this episode. But also, another big thing in the news is the devastation of Hurricane Helene on the east coast of the country. I just want to say my prayers go out to those people affected, and I hope they get the relief that they need. But moving along, if you're new to this podcast, I just want to reiterate what this podcast is about. Simply put, I like to open with satire, and, make fun of the politics of everything, my opinions. Then in the part 1, I'd like to spend 5 minutes on a topic related to Christianity, like Bible basics and stuff. Then in part 2, I do like 5 minutes on a political topic, political issues or news. And who knows, maybe I'll change the format of the podcast in the future. But for now, this is what I'm going for. So if this kind of stuff seems appealing to you, please like, subscribe, follow the show, and give a nice rating in hopes to grow my audience. So, I just want to see where this can go. So let me speed it up. Like I said, I went long in the beginning. Let me hurry it up. For today's topic, the church. Here we go. I'm going to stick to the basics on the church. Like what is church? Why is there church? What happens in church? The ultra basic stuff. Because I feel like in modern society, I don't think people really know what the purpose of church is or why it's there. And I think the average person just has a meme-like idea of what church is because how it's portrayed in film and TV. And I must say, I always cringe when I see church or Christianity portrayed in modern TV because it always seems portrayed in a negative light, as some cringy, lame group of people type of thing. The kind of people that overly use Christianese phrases like, we are the sheep, we must follow the shepherd, that kind of stuff in the scripts. And I'm just like, who wrote this script? Probably some 20-something-year-old who got mad at the church because they were told that they needed to repent from their sins. And now they're deconstructing their faith and want to put it on display on a TV show series or something like that. Or I think about, that one song that came out in 2013, Take Me to Church by Hozier. I hope that's how you pronounce the dude's name, Hozier, which you would think a song like that would be about going to church, but turns out the song is mainly about using the church model of worship as a metaphor for worshiping a person or a lover. Don't get me wrong, I do believe art has a way of reflecting what is happening in society, but art as an interpretive mechanism can inject personal opinions that aren't true to the object itself. I guess what I'm trying to say is using church or religious ideas in art doesn't fully explain what church is very well. Anyway, I'm blabbering on too long. Okay, church. You see church buildings everywhere you go. And maybe wonder, why are there so many? And so many different kinds? And why do people go to those places? I hear many people criticize the church, saying things like, church people are a bunch of hypocrites, or I don't believe in organized religion, or they just want my money, or things like, there's just a bunch of scandals in church. Why should I even be a part of it? Okay, those are fair questions, don't get me wrong. But to those people, I say, yeah, you're right. But every last thing you mentioned, there can be found those same scandals and problems outside of church too. I mean, non-church people are guilty of the same crimes, the same scandals, the what have yous. And no, I'm not saying that's a good excuse, but it's just a reminder of the human condition. That mankind, meaning all humans, we are guilty of sin. We are all basically bad in nature. And we have to be taught what is good. Speaking of church, that reminds me of something brought up in church recently. A passage where Jesus says to a rich man And this rich man wanted to know how to have eternal life. Jesus says to him, because the rich man called Jesus good teacher, Jesus says to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." Now, Jesus doesn't deny that he himself is, he's not saying he's not good, but simply questions the rich man why he considers Jesus to be the good teacher. Jesus simply states only God is good because Jesus knew the rich man was not going to be able to give up his riches to follow him. That's just something talked about in church recently, and it's interesting because you learn about these types of spiritual concepts in church, which, it just reminded me right now how we look at Jesus' words in the Bible about what it means to be good. But I digress. I'm talking too much again. In the book of Acts, written by Luke in the New Testament, which some consider, they call it like the sequel of the book of Luke. In chapter 2, verse 42 of that book, the book of Acts, you can see kind of laid out the main purpose of church. Also, the book of Luke also sort of gives an account of the first church after Jesus rose from the dead, after being crucified. We see Jesus spending a few moments with the disciples, and then we see the disciples carrying out the gospel message of Jesus, which would be considered the first church ever recorded. But yes, that's in Acts 2:42. That's what I'm talking about here. Acts 2:42. It says, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer." What does that mean? Well, basically, the first church studied the Bible. They came together in fellowship, and they did the tradition of taking communion, the breaking of bread and drinking the wine. And that, because, that symbolizes Jesus' death and resurrection. And lastly, we see them praying together. And there you have it in a nutshell. That's basically what goes on in those churches, Bible study, fellowship, communion, praying. Of course, there are additional things like music, because singing together is an easy way to come together to worship God in fellowship. And of course, God gives freedom to worship Him in different ways, as we see many different denominations, but all basically doing the same thing essentially. But, with variations here and there, which there's not enough time on this podcast to go through all of that, but maybe one day I will go deeper into that separate topic. But as for now, the church is the body of believers. It's a fellowship, a group, all gathered at a specific place for a specific reason: to learn, grow, and experience God, in order to pass on the good news to the people who need to hear the good news of Jesus. Part 2. J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz debate. There's no question. Anyone with eyes could see who the clear winner was on that debate. And the winner was, in fact, J.D. Vance. And the losers were hands down the moderators. What a bunch of pathetic, deceitful pair these moderators were. The biggest problem was when they promised not to fact-check any of the candidates. Out of nowhere, surprise, surprise, they decide to fact-check J.D. Vance. But J.D. wasn't going to go down without a fight, which is exactly how you want to fight in a debate when the cards are stacked against you. Listen.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. temporary protected status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn out of the
debate,
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to
we're-
fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Yeah, they didn't expect the fact check to get fact checked. But speaking of fact checks, in this next clip, the moderators, why am I having a hard time saying moderators? The moderators asked Tim Walz to simply make the record straight about his time in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests. Tiananmen? I think that's how you say it. He claimed he was there during political protests in China, but then a little research shows he was in Hong Kong way after the protests. So, all he had to say was, yeah, I made a mistake and I wasn't completely honest. And I'm sorry about that. I mean, that's what an honest human being would do, right? Well, let's listen to Tim Walz's response here.
Right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong, and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Yeah, you see, Tim Walz is not weird at all. He's just the knucklehead. Yeah, just your run-of-the-mill knucklehead. A man of the people, really. A man of the knuckleheads. Ah, my goodness. Lastly, I want you to hear my favorite part of the debate, which was Vance's closing statement. Here we go. Grab your tissue boxes.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
The only reason I'm crying is because I wish this guy was running for president and not vice president. Yeah. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening. And don't forget, keep up the faith.